Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be tackling the most important repair for your 3rd gen Toyota 4Runner. If you guys didn't guess it, it's going to be the lower ball joint. As you guys know, these trucks and also other trucks like the 1st gen Tundra, 1st gen Tacoma, and 1st gen Sequoia all have these poorly designed lower ball joints. Basically, when these things fail, this lower ball joint will actually separate from this cast here. And this piece here is actually connected to the steering knuckle, and this here is connected to the lower control arms. So basically, once they separate, there's nothing holding your wheel in from the bottom. And what ends up happening is this thing swings out and causes catastrophic damage. Now, fortunately, most of the failures have happened at low speeds, but there have been a couple reports where this actually happened at high speeds. So when this lower ball joint does separate, you can expect damage to the fender, you can expect damage to your CV axle because it's bolted to the wheel, it's gonna pull itself out. You can expect damage to the brake lines and maybe even the front bumper. Some have been even more catastrophic where it actually ripped off the upper control arm and the wheel actually separated from the vehicle and went spinning on its own. Here's a couple clips that will hopefully scare you a little bit and make you actually want to change your lower ball joints. Now, the only true way to fix this problem is to actually replace your lower ball joints with quality parts. A lot of guys will run aftermarket and the cheapest lower ball joint they can find, and sooner than later, they end up regretting it. Let's go ahead and check out what we got for this job and some other options you guys can consider if you're doing this job. So this here is the kit that we went with. This actually isn't my truck that I'm doing on. I actually have already done this job a couple years ago. This is actually for a buddy of mine. His name is Michael. And he was asking me about which ones should I buy and which ones are the best ones. And this is the one that I told him to buy. So this here, you can see the part number, and I will leave it in the description as well for you guys. And basically, this is the Toyota recall kit that Toyota actually sold when they were fixing this problem. And unfortunately, they were only fixing this problem for some year Toyota 4Runners and some year Sequoias. But what you can do is you can actually buy this kit, and it's actually going to save you about $30. So what we did was we bought this kit, and it comes with both the left and the right ball joint, as you can see here. And unfortunately, this kit doesn't actually come with new lower castle nuts. They're actually telling you to reuse the existing ones. But Michael wanted to go safe and actually get all brand new ones. And I'll leave a part number for you guys so that way you guys can pick these up if you guys decide to go with the recall kit. Now, another option is to actually just buy the individual lower ball joints themselves. They will actually come with a castle nut as well as a cotter pin. As you can see here, we don't have a cotter pin either. But if you go that route and you end up buying the lower ball joints by themselves, they'll cost you about $30 more or so. It's not that big of a deal, and you'll get the same part. Now, another option I don't have here, and I don't really recommend to my viewers because it's actually not really proven yet, and this is the aftermarket route where some folks are actually claiming that you can buy Moog lower ball joints, and they're actually the 555 Senkei ball joints. And if you want to go that route, you can do that as well. They have a greasable fitting on it, and you can grease it. I don't really know, and I don't really trust it, so you know, I figured the Toyota ones have lasted so long, we may as well go with Toyota. Now, earlier I mentioned the recall kit actually did not come with cotter pins, and in this case, McGeorge Toyota, where we bought this from, actually provided the necessary cotter pins for the job. And I was actually searching for these and I couldn't find them, and it was really nice of them to include 4 of them for this job. And the reason why you need 4, 2 is for the lower castle nut here, and then the other 2 are going to be for the tie rod ends that are going to connect to the lower ball joint. They actually don't want you to reuse those cotter pins. If your set didn't come with cotter pins, you can always buy a cotter pin set, or you can go to a local parts store. I'm pretty sure they sell these. And what you can do is buy basically the 1/8 inch. It looks like it works really good for the tie rod end. And then the 5/32 works for the lower ball joint. This one will probably work as well. So if you want to just buy one, just buy the 1/8 inch. And it doesn't need to be this long, but you can always just cut it. And then here we have brand new bolts for the job. Now, I recommend you get brand new bolts because some of the failures on these lower ball joints have actually come from stripped bolts. And mainly because maybe they're old or they're all rusty and some of these threads aren't hanging on as much anymore. But you definitely want to get new bolts. And there's actually 2 kinds of bolts you can get. You can get this flange style bolt, which you see here. or you can get one with the bolt and the washer. And we opted to get these because these actually will torque to 59 foot-pounds, which is more than the regular bolt with washer, which is only 37 or 39, I believe. So definitely pick yourselves up 8 of these bolts, and I'll leave the part numbers for these as well. Now, one thing we're going to do once we take apart the truck is actually compare the bolts that are on there with these new ones to see if they're actually a little bit longer, because if they're a little bit longer, then we know that they've stretched over time, and that's definitely a good sign to get new bolts. But we're going to just play it safe and just put new bolts anyways. If you guys are going with the Moog or 555 kit, it actually comes with bolts as well, so you definitely don't need that. All right, guys, let's talk about some of the tools we're going to need for this job. Here you'll see I have a 24 millimeter on a 1/2-inch ratchet. This is to break the lower castle nut. I have a couple 14 millimeters deep socket, as well as a short socket and an extension. I don't really know what we're going to be using yet, but this is to break those 4 bolts that we talked about earlier. I've got a 19 millimeter with an extension to break apart the tie rod end, and then some pliers to take apart the cotter pins. And obviously you're going to need something to take apart your wheels. And then for us on our bolts, we're going to be using blue Loctite just for extra security. I definitely recommend that because you don't want those bolts going loose. And then a torque wrench to put everything back together to spec. We're also going to need some special tools to pull apart the lower ball joint and the tie rod end. This is OTC 6295 kit. You actually don't need to buy this. You can actually rent this from a local auto parts store. What you're going to need is this lower arm puller 7314A for the lower ball joint castle nut. And then you're going to need this tie rod end puller 6296 to separate the tie rod end. Or if you guys don't want to go with this route, you can bring out your 3-pound sledge and you can bang on the lower control arm and the lower ball joint until it separates. And since you're replacing the lower ball joint, it's probably not a big deal. Lower control arm is pretty beefy. Just make sure it's not completely rusted and you should be okay with this route. A lot of people do this. Now you're definitely going to need a jack to lift up your vehicle as well. And these 2 tools here that you see are actually for checking the lower ball joint, which we're going to do first before we do any job. But even if it ends up going well, we're still going to end up replacing it because Michael's truck has over 260,000 miles on it. He's owned it since 2001. And he knows for a fact that he did not change the lower ball joint yet, so it's pretty much on borrowed time. All right, we're going to loosen up the lug nut so that way we don't ruin the alignment. Even though you're supposed to have it checked after this job, I'm just going to do the proper thing here. All right, after you do that, you're going to want to lift the vehicle and put it on jack stands. I'm going to do one side at a time, but you can easily do both sides at a time if you want to. All right, before we take the wheels off, we're actually going to be checking the lower ball joint. And the easiest way to do that is to take one of these shovels here and stick it under the tire. And we're going to use the leverage and lift it up and down to check for movement. All right, guys, we got the car jacked up on one side here on jack stands. And what we're going to do now is stick the shovel under this tire. And we're going to see if that ball joint moves at all. All right, guys, so you can see here we are leveraging down on the tire here, and you can see the ball joint is not moving up and down. Normally you'll hear like noises in between and you'll actually see it separate. I'll put a little clip for you guys so you guys can see what I'm talking about. But this here is actually still a good ball joint, but we're actually going to test it another way as well. Let me show you guys. All right, we're in a little bit closer now, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this pry bar, and it's about 2 feet long. What we're going to do is we're going to stick it in here up against that bolt back there. And remember how I was telling you guys the ball joint can separate? So if you lever down, you see how that ball joint is not separating from that lower control arm? All right, guys, now we got checks out all the way. We're going to go ahead and get with this job now. We're going to remove the wheel first, and then we're going to see what we're working with. Wow, that came off easily. All right, you guys, first thing we're going to do is loosen the 4 bolts that are under here. There's 2 on this side and 2 on the other side. And it looks like this deep socket 14 is going to work for me. You're just going to want to loosen it. You don't want to take it off. Oh boy, that's on tight. All right, guys, if for some reason you can't get to the bolts, you can turn the steering wheel, put the key in the ignition, turn the steering wheel, so that way you can get access to the bolts. All right, guys, we are back here at the tie rod end here. We're gonna have to take apart this cotter pin, and then slide it out, and then we're going to take it off with a 19 millimeter. Once you get it out a little bit, you can just pry it out with these dikes. All right guys, now we're going to take this 19 millimeter with an extension, and we're going to take apart this castle nut. All right, I took it off and I flipped it upside down, and this is so that I can put the puller on here so I can separate it. But before you do that, I'm going to actually loosen the bottom lower nut here. That way things don't start moving around on me. This is the thing that's actually preventing this from turning. All right guys, we're down here at the lower castle nut. We're going to take apart the cotter pin again. We're going to grab our 24 millimeter and we're going to take it off the lower ball joint here. So this is on here pretty tight, 105. Oh, that wasn't too bad. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to thread this on upside down to help us get the puller on here. All right, that should be good. All right guys, back up on top here. We're going to take apart this tie rod end from the lower ball joint here. So we're going to use this little pitman arm here. I'm going to stick it under there. Try not to damage the boot, because we do plan on reusing this. So just sneak it under there, thread this on, and you see this castle nut actually keeps it inside of the stud here, so that's kind of helpful. And this takes a 19 millimeter on top. Now if for some reason you can't get a puller from your local parts store, or you don't own one, most people don't, like I mentioned, you can bang on this right here. So you would want to bang on the top here where the lower ball joint is, and with enough strikes this thing should free up. But since we have the proper tool, we're going to use the puller. Stay back a little bit because it's going to get loud. One thing that's also nice with keeping the nut on here is when it comes slamming down, it'll actually stop on the nut as well. Well, that wasn't very violent at all. All right guys, that's off. You can go ahead and take off the nut now. We're going to be reusing this. All right, we're just going to leave that there. All right guys, we're back down here, and the reason why we took this arm off first is so that way we can pivot this thing, as you can see here. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get this guy under. Got to thread it on there, same thing, center it best you can. Use the castle nut to help you. We're going to use a 19 millimeter, same thing. Now since we have the bolts still on in here, this thing is not going to come flying out. If you guys already took your bolts out, just keep that in mind. There's not going to be anything holding this thing in. But we're just separating this, and once it's separated, then we're going to tie this guy off. Just keep your arms free. This one might be loud. There we go. All right, guys. All right, guys, I do want to mention that there is tension on this nut right now, so make sure you don't remove this nut yet. I'll show you guys what to do. All right, guys, to relieve the tension off that nut, we're going to jack up the lower control arm just a little bit. And you can see the nut comes off really easily now. So we're going to go ahead and finish taking off the 4 bolts now that we took off earlier. I'm just going to zip them out to make it a little bit quicker. All right, you guys, before you guys go any farther, make sure you guys secure the steering knuckle. You can see here, I've just strapped it temporarily. I don't think it's gonna move, but just in case, you never know. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and take off the lower castle nut now. All right, we're gonna lower the jack now. And like I said, just keep an eye on this guy because now we're gonna be separated. Now you guys can probably see the lower ball joint is still stuck in there and you can't get it out. So what you have to do is you have to lift this steering knuckle up, and that's where this jack comes in handy. So I'm going to jack it up right here where the rotor is, And I'm gonna put a block of wood just to make sure I don't destroy it. All right, there you go, guys. Lower ball joint is out. We're gonna go ahead and get the new one in and prep everything and get it ready. That way we can just leave this up. It's a good idea to use some brake clean down there. All right, you guys, I got my parts here. Make sure you guys compare it. They are site specific. They're not really stamped or anything like that. I mean, it has an L on this one, so I guess maybe that's it. Just make sure you do the right one. You'll know right away when it's wrong. Let's go ahead and drop this guy in now. Just like that. Start the new castle nut. All right, and then when you guys drop down this jack here, make sure you line it up nicely. There's actually little grooves inside of here. They're like dowel pins. They help line it up. So it looks like I dropped it all the way and it's still not down far enough, so we're gonna have to jack up the lower control arm again to get it up there. Just make sure everything's lining up before you jack it up too far. There we go, guys. So I'm going to be using blue Loctite on these bolts. Definitely recommend it. If these bolts come free, you're basically going to lose a wheel. All right, so just get Loctite on all your bolts and stick them in there. We're not going to tighten them yet. Okay. All right, guys, once you get those 4 bolts in, just finger tight, we can put on the castle nut a little bit farther here. Just get that finger tight as well. And then we're gonna go ahead and put the tie rod end back on now. So just turn it until it goes in. I'm gonna go ahead and snug everything up. So upper tie rod here, or this tie rod end here. Then we're gonna snug up the lower castle nut here. All right, once you do all that, you can lower the jack now. You don't need it anymore. Take off our strap. All right, guys, first thing we're gonna torque is the lower castle nut here. It's 105 foot-pounds. It's important that you have this tie rod end in. That'll prevent it from turning. All right, now you may not be able to see this, but this cotter pin hole actually doesn't line up, so you're gonna have to go a little bit tighter. All right, so now that that's in, we're gonna put the new cotter pin in, the one that was supplied by McGeorge. Thank you, McGeorge. Stick the cotter pin in there, and you can do it from the back or the front. Doesn't really matter. And then just bend it over. All right, we should be done there. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and torque the tie rod in here. It is 69 foot-pounds, or a little bit more if the castle nut doesn't line up. And it is just past it, so we're gonna have to tighten it some more. Okay. All right, guys, we got it lined up. I'm just gonna stick the cotter pin through, a couple taps, and just bend it back. All right, you guys, last step is to torque the 4 bolts. You want to do this in a crisscross pattern if you can. Definitely recommend it. But the torque spec is 59 foot-pounds. All right, then we're going to do the front. And one more time for peace of mind. All right, you guys, before I tackle the other side, I'm going to show you guys the bolts And you can see here, these ones actually are not too bad. They're not completely rusted out. I mean, on the top they are, but that's because these actually protrude past the lower ball joint. So they probably have all that grime on there. But you can see the bolt lengths are pretty much identical. So these actually probably can be reused, but you know, we decided to play it safe and just replace them anyways. All right, you guys, we're pretty much done on this side. We're gonna put the wheel back on and get it back on the ground. And since the passenger side is exactly the same, I'm not gonna bore you guys, just do exactly the same thing as I showed you guys here, and you'll be pretty much done with the job. All right, you guys, as you saw, vehicle's back on the ground. Make sure when you put the wheels on, snug it up against the hub. Don't tighten it all the way yet, and then we're gonna torque it now that it's on the ground. Torque spec is 83 foot-pounds. And you're gonna wanna go in a crisscross pattern. All right, you guys, we are all done with the job. I got the wheels back on, torqued properly. The other side is also done. One thing you wanna have to do now is make sure you guys go and get your alignment checked. Toyota actually recommends you get it checked. We didn't actually touch any of the alignment parts, but we did move that outer tie rod. So it's probably a good idea to check it. Michael should be able to drive home just fine. There shouldn't be any issues. His tires are pretty much bald already, so he probably doesn't really care as much. But make sure you guys go ahead and get that alignment checked. So hopefully now with the job all done, Michael can have peace of mind with his 1997 Toyota 4Runner. As mentioned, it's got over 260,000 miles on it. And who knows the last time it was done. Cross my fingers that it's gonna last him another 100,000 miles or so before he has to do it again. Me personally, I would do the lower ball joint every time you guys do the timing belt. That way you know that it's gonna be good for at least 6 to 10 years, hopefully. Now I know some of you guys probably think that's crazy to do it every 6 or 10 years, but you have to remember that these original ball joints, while they did last this long, we don't know if the quality control of today was as good as it was back in 1997 or 1999. And also a lot of people are doing lifts and putting bigger tires and bigger offset wheels on. And most likely what's happening is they're not changing their lower ball joint. And what ends up happening is you shock the system, and right after your lift or right after your new tires, you end up having a failure. So if you're gonna do all that, make sure you guys do the lower ball joints at a minimum before you actually put all the lifts and all the tires in. At least you know it's brand new and fresh. And if you can get Toyota OEM, I would do that as well. All right, here's one last final tip for you guys, and that is to not throw away your lower ball joints, especially if they're still good. In our test here, you guys saw that they are still not moving, and they're probably still good, but I wouldn't use them for daily driving. I would keep them around just in case your new OEM ones, or whatever you replaced it with, fails prematurely. Because if it fails, you're gonna be stuck on the road, and you're gonna have to get a tow. And if you have these around, and the damage is not severe enough, you probably can just take these out there and perform the repair on the spot. So keep these around, and hopefully you never have to use them, but if you do, you'll have them and it won't cost you a penny. If you guys want to check if your vehicle is part of the recall, so that way you guys can save some money, I'm going to leave a link down in the description below where you can enter your VIN number in and see if it's part of the recall. Now there are a few guys out there redesigning these lower ball joints. They're prototyping some things where there's actually using a snap ring, kind of like the newer 4Runners. There's also some guys that are actually working on lower ball joint savers. And all that's designed to do is just minimize the damage that's gonna happen if it actually separates. I'll put a couple pictures and videos and links in the description for you guys so you guys can check them out and support them. So that way we have a solution in the future for this. Now if you or somebody you know suffered from lower ball joint failure, make sure you guys let me know down in the comments. I'm gonna leave a link in the description for a lower ball joint support group. You guys can go ahead and join that group and check it out. There's over 8,000 members in there, and pretty much they're all afraid of failures or had failures happen to themselves. As always guys, I'm gonna leave all the part numbers and tools used in this video down in the video description, so make sure you guys check that out. If you guys are interested in other mods or repairs, make sure you guys check out my other videos, and make sure you guys subscribe to my channel for more content. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. And as always guys, have a nice day.